Yeah, Graham is blessing us with not only speaking today, but he's going to be launching the result of many years of research in this talk and at this show, and moreover has been instrumental in helping us to coordinate some of the really extraordinary installations that are on the first floor, and has a exhibit in Studio B called Presence Fields in collaboration with Dave Rokeby and Vincent John Vincent, which to me is like watching one of my textbooks come to life. So it's very exciting, and I hope you'll go and give that your time. And I will let Graham speak for himself and his work. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to be also going back a bit in time, but also forward a lot into the future. At the end, we're going to have a series of kind of announcements of breakthroughs in autism and user interface design. And I guess, what I really come from is what would McLuhan think of VR? What would his take on this new medium be? If the medium's a message, what's the message behind this new technology? And I was a researcher at the McLuhan program. I ran the virtual reality artist access program. The director, Derek DeKirchhoff, and I, who took over after McLuhan from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, is a good friend, and we've collaborated on many projects. He wrote the introduction to the Presence Fields exhibition downstairs with Vincent John Vincent and David Rokeby. And I'm not a McLuhan scholar, but I think he would say that currently it's a cold medium. Cold, why is it a cold medium? Because it's still very low resolution. Even with a high-res screen, when you're filling up 120-degree field of view, you're still looking at pixels. There's still all sorts of issues of latency, of when you're flying around, your body's not getting any gravity cues. The latency, it doesn't exactly keep up. And I got sick at Disney when I was with simulator sickness. And a lot of people have this kind of problem with full VR systems. It's still bulky and uncomfortable, and it's very much like early television in my view. I think in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it will change, but currently I think McLuhan, but I might be wrong. But because I come at this not as a McLuhan scholar or a philosopher, but as a media artist. I think of art at its most significant as a dew line, a distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what is beginning to happen to it. And that's what I see my role as, is someone who's pushing the boundaries of this technology through art and innovation. And so I guess it goes back to my first head-mounted display, which was in some ways, I think not the first head-mounted display, but the first head-mounted display as an artwork. I exhibited at my graduation show at the Ontario College of Art, and hopefully we will get the. So this is me with a lot more hair, I think, and skinnier actually. And what you don't, when you put on the head mount, you saw yourself from another perspective, from the other camera perspective, and you saw your displaced perspective. And there was also the second eyepiece held a recorded version of this. So the people you thought were with you, actually sometimes they weren't, and someone would walk right through you. It was a kind of an eerie experience. And then I did another piece called Displaced Perspectives, and this was with the McLuhan program. We did a piece called the Strategic Arts Initiative with very famous, my instructor, Norman White, Doug Back, David Rokeby, Laura Prokoka, Carl Hamfeld, and myself. And we linked this early Telepresence exhibit between Salerno, Italy, and the Art Culture Resource Center in Toronto. Now, that sounds good because Norm White had an arm wrestling robot. You could arm wrestle with someone over the internet. I had remotely controlled robots. You could explore these other worlds. And I mean, that sounds really great, but actually, you know, it was 300 baud modems, and like, I don't know if anyone even knows what 300 baud means these days, but it's like, it's very, very, very slow. So we had to take a telephone and you'd phone from Italy, and the Italian phone system is like not that great. It's better now. And you'd wait for the dial, and then you'd plug it in and press a button. Oh my God, so I was also involved in developing what I called spherical photography. And this is an image of my backyard back then in the early 80s. And each one is a separate photograph. So that I turned the camera on its side, took a series of 12 photographs, turned it 10 degrees, took another series, until I built up a very high-res image of a 360-degree image. But I found that it was hard to read. People would look at it and they'd say, oh, it's a nice image, but it's almost impossible to understand a panorama because as humans, we see pieces of that panorama around me in a time frame. I can't see everything all at once. I have to take time to scan. And I kept experimenting with this idea of panoramic imaging. This is an early panoramic film robot that I developed. Each one is a Bolex movie camera. It's spun around, moving through the city. I actually tried downloading the video from this, but of the machine in operation, but it crashed my system. But I will play you the result of that. So each one is, again, it's a panorama, and the machine would spin around and take 90 frames as one, and then it would move forward and take another 90 frames. And this should play. And now we can actually put this into a head mount, and you can actually have an early panoramic movie. And this was like 95, or not, sorry, 85. So this was before there was virtual reality. And I was looking at again, the idea of space as being something that it takes time to look at. You can't, again, this image is very difficult to read. I think it's very beautiful, but it's very difficult for the human mind to comprehend this kind of image. So what I did is I created a kind of a physical texture map. I cut the photographs into gore shapes and put it back onto a physical globe. And you can see that the curved lines of the panorama become straight. And I found that fascinating, that you could actually take a panoramic image, and again, this creates a time base because you can't see the whole sphere. You have to turn the globe to look at it. And I thought, well, couldn't we do this in a computer? Couldn't I have a computer do this? And I went to the University of Toronto, and they had this Cray supercomputer, and they said, yeah, we could probably do this, but it's going to take a programmer about half a year because it doesn't exist, and it's going to, and I was like, okay, and now, of course, like, this thing has 100 times more powerful than the $80 million Cray supercomputer. So, and why did I want to do this? Well, I was fascinated with what astronauts told us about seeing the world from space, the overview effect. And I still am fascinated and obsessed with this experience because when astronauts come back, they tell us that you can't understand the world without actually going into orbit and seeing the world from space. Then your mind is transformed. We still live on a flat Earth. We still think of the Earth as flat because we can't experience it as astronauts do. And astronauts who come back say that. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a head-mounted display, an underwater head-mounted display, and I'll be able to create the overview effect for people in swimming pools. And the first step was this kind of IMAX theater I wanted to build in a swimming pool. So the IMAX projector would be pointing down, and it would be projected onto the bottom of a dome-shaped pool. And I went to IMAX, and they thought I was a bit crazy, but one of their researchers, Gord Harris, who was their innovation guy, he lent me their swimming pool, and this is actually me taking an image of the IMAX from the IMAX camera, projecting it underwater onto a dome that they had out there, and then later in the video, me getting into the swimming pool. Let's see if it'll move forward. And then I get into the swimming pool and experience the overview effect. So what happens is because you're decontextualizing the image for people, because you're seeing the image while you're weightless and underwater, and the image is surrounding you like a panorama. And so I said, okay, this was okay, but it wasn't it was actually very cold, but anyways. Actually, years later, in 2010, I convinced the European Space Agency to actually give me money to do this, actually. We actually did build an underwater swimming pool, and we actually built it and made it onto Discovery Channel. Audio?
Space.
Oh, sorry.
The final frontier. One trip and you'll never be the same again.
When astronauts are in space, they suddenly see the world as a sphere. And what they do is they have this epiphany. They really, their mind changes, their perception of the world changes.
It's called the overview effect. Most of us will never experience it. That is, unless this man gets his way.
25 years ago as an artist, I started working on ways to actually recreate this effect.
At his shop in Holland, Graham Smith is working on the next generation of cinema.
When you're weightless, you perceive things in a different way.
His plan? Take the entire movie experience and put it underwater. It's an idea that first came to Graham as a student in the 80s.
My idea at that point was to basically be able to project the imagery through the water onto the bottom of a dome-shaped pool.
After a meeting with IMAX in 1993, he got a chance to test it.
This was a really compelling experience, but the problems were that the light was being absorbed by the water by about 10 times. And you also got your shadow in the way of this kind of simulation. So at that point I realized this probably wasn't going to work. We need to come up with a new way to do this.
Testing at the European Space Agency. Inside, Graham and his team are getting prepped. Today, they're showing the unit off for the first time to the project's main investor.
You've got to be nervous because there's all kinds of technology. You've got electrical stuff, you've got water problems, you've got computer problems. I mean, there's all sorts of things can go wrong.
With the aqua tile screen in place and the sun now fading, it's time to shine. Weightless in the pool, the swimmers see a range of videos, from mountain flyovers to animations inside the International Space Station. So what do they think?
I'm convinced this will be a very successful thing.
It was a great experience. If I just think how it would be if there would be more tiles, I think it would be wonderful.
The folks from ESA also give 2 thumbs up.
At the moment in space we use virtual reality for the astronauts to train. We also have the astronauts training in pools, and this is a combination of the both. And this is as close as you and me can get to the experience you might have in space. So I mean, I continue with this project. Oh, sorry, that's not. That's for later. And so I continued in the 80s to develop a way to do this, to create an underwater head-mounted display. And I formed a company called Horizon Scan and patented. I have a dozen patents in virtual reality and panoramic imaging, and these are some of the early patents. And what I did is we started off, and then I saw this article in Scientific American, which a lot of us in the field were really blown away by because it was quite fascinating. And I met my good friend Jaron Lanier, who's another artist. I mean, he's a musician. You go into Jaron's house and he has over 500 musical instruments from around the world hanging out, and he can pick up any of them and actually play them. And Jaron had an idea of a visual programming language. That's what VPL stands for. He wanted to be able to program within a VR environment with a headset on. So our 2 companies joined collaboration. He licensed the technology for the panoramic imaging from Horizon Scan, and we actually created what is called, was shown at SIGGRAPH called Videosphere in 1990. We were using a slit scan film camera, which is like a camera that rotates, and there's a very small slit in it, and the film passes past the slit as it's rotating. And you can build up these beautiful panorama. It's an ancient technology. It goes back to 1848, I believe. So the technology wasn't, but we were scanning it and putting it into a VR environment. And I think this is that.
So this is an early head mount that I built.
The head-mounted display, which uses 2-color LCD screens, and we can get a series of.
And that's the same image you saw
images in
previously.
the computer, which the user then moves their head to scan around, looking at the scene. This is the actual image taken from the.
We also developed a series of panoramic lenses because the slit scan would create a still image, but how do you create movies? So I developed and patented this kind of idea to use spherical lenses. And this was an IMAX camera. We shot an early panoramic film using panoramic lenses. And it all was going really well, actually, except for a few problems. Here's another image from the thing. But as an entrepreneur, the lesson, the first lesson you learn as a high-tech entrepreneur is first in, lose. If you're first into a technology, it's very difficult. I mean, these early VR systems were very expensive. You needed 2 giant silicon graphic machines that cost $500,000 each, one for each eye. It was incredibly expensive, and the time was not right. I mean, this has 100 times more powerful than $1 million worth of computers back then. So, as an entrepreneur, it's difficult, but that's my first lesson. So what did I do? I went and I decided I wanted to do this on a totally different way. I wanted to do it. So I took what was being thrown out back then by the libraries, a microfiche machine. And I took my panoramic images and I put them into the microfiche machine and had a gear system so that when you rotated this periscope, it would pan the image past the lens. And I believe this will play.
With panoramic
Yeah, hold on a second.
and into a map, and you can see the qual. This
Oh, here we
is
go.
called Laura's House, which documents Laura Koko's farmhouse in.
And you can see that it was a beautiful system because it was a real-time interaction. As you rotate the display, the film image, the panorama was moved past the lens. And they showed this at an event, and a couple of engineers from UT were like, "Wow, where are the computers? That was amazing. There's no latency and all this stuff." And it was all just technology that was being thrown out. And I even went so far as to take a ViewMaster and hooked it up with the same kind of system where there was 2 3D panoramas in front of your eye, and it was all geared up to a gear above, like basically on the center point of your head, and it was on this arm system. And someone would come up, and this was Steve Warm from the Vivid group back then, who's and he will come up hopefully momentarily. And where are you, Steve? Maybe we'll speed things up here. So you can see as he's rotating his head, this gear system is actually moving these panoramas back and forth in front of it. But it was incredibly compelling because it was very high resolution and there was no latency. I mean, you couldn't really jump to a new image or anything, but I thought it was as a kind of Leonardo-esque kind of idea of VR. It was a pretty good idea. But I actually had the guy from ViewMaster come in, the head of R&D, but he kind of thought it was interesting, but he didn't go very far. So in the early 90s, I went back to the McLuhan program. And this is actual coach house at UT where McLuhan did all his research. And I started something called the Virtual Reality Artist Access Program. Artists are the distant early warning system, and McLuhan really felt that they were important early innovators to show us where this kind of technology is going to move in the future. We had a early video conferencing system using PictureTel video. We linked up around the world for Wednesday evening lectures from people all over the world. We had Telepresence art events with Kit Galloway, Sherry Rabinowitz from the Electronic Cafe International. We had an information rights group on Thursdays looking at how the suppression of information affects technology. And this is research that I continue on to this day, actually. And this was at the Venice Biennale. I developed this little robot named Fred, and Fred was this tiny telepresence robot that would roam around inside this virtual world that artists from the city had created. A lot of artists, again, Doug Back, Norman White, many people who I've worked with for decades. And then I got a call one day from Kit and Sherry, and they were putting together a show for Comdex that year. And they wanted me to build a telepresence robot that I called Wilma that would perform in front of the White House. And it would be connected to Comdex, and people would actually be able to hear poets and performers from the streets of Washington. As people from Comdex would drive this robot around in front of the White House, they could perform back or forth. And I thought, okay, this is great. So I built this crazy robot in almost no time. We had to wrap it sometimes in bubble wrap because it was raining. And actually, I do have and actually it got it into the Washington Post. There was, because this was the early information superhighway. Now, it almost got me arrested and thrown in jail for the rest of my life, because we were in front of the White House, and we did all these performances, and people were doing street performances, and then we were kind of, because we had to be in the Hayes Adams Hotel right opposite the White House, because we needed to have an ISDN line coming down to hook into the robot. So, I was having a bath, and I got a knock on the door, and I get my bathrobe on, and there's a police officer, and there's the hotel security, and there's a Secret Service agent, and there's an electronics warfare team, and there's a dog sniffing team, and 20 cops down the hall, and they're all just like, what are you doing, And I'm like, well, I'm just an artist, and they're like, well, this isn't really illegal, but you should take your bathrobe and stand in the hall, because the electronic warfare team's going to come in first, and then the explosives team, and so in the end I was interrogated by this Secret Service officer, because they couldn't find anything, and he was like, who gave you permission? And I was like, oh, hold on, and I called up Kit and Sherry on the video conferencing system in Comdex, and they suddenly appeared. He was like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. And they started talking, and then the guy was like, whoa, can you see me? And they're like, he said, turn it off. And so we kind of turned the camera a bit, and so the window looked like he wasn't, but I still have it on tape, but I'm afraid to actually get it transferred. I might never go back to the United States ever again. But I can actually show you I believe I can show you a clip. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. This was Wilma became famous. This is Crazy Al Yankovic. He was on stage. He was flirting with Wilma a bit. We did stuff with Perth. I know. Here's Senator Popov. Oh, click.
I lived up in the end of 1994 with the Electronic Cafe and a man named Dan McKay, and together we proposed an idea to Electronic Cafe.
And they treated it like a guest, like an honored guest.
Because I see Wilma as an electronic support. Video conferencing system, and you're now live in Las Vegas at Comdex. Your show we're speaking to? Land of the free, home of the free. Don't wanna be upset by no bourgeoisie, 'cause it's the bourgeois town. The Electronic Cafe was set up in.
You'd be shot on sight. If you tried to do this now, I mean, you wouldn't get within 100 meters of the White House. I mean, you'd be dead.
So it was a crazy project, highly stressful, but
That was a bit hairier back then, of course. But
Senator
anyway.
Popov played a big role at Comdex 94. On the streets of Washington, we had people on the streets of Washington D.C. serenading Wilma the robot. Hi there.
you can dress it up too.
The research projects that we're involved with McLuhan program in.
I had a hard time getting across the border again.
A
but
project called the Supply Student, which.
And then after that, I formed. I thought, oh, this is a good idea. Let's have a
two-way
telepresence
video
robotics
conferencing.
company. So I formed Telbotics here in Toronto. And the first thing we wanted to do was use this unit to link ill children with cancer from home back into schools, because they have a really hard time reintegrating. And the people I was working with here at Ryerson, Dr. Deb Fells and Yuta Tavaranis, she was at U of T back then, she's at OCAD now. We tried putting this into a school but we found that actually you don't want robots roaming around your classroom. As a teacher, I'm a teacher, you want your students in the seat, like in one place. So we developed what's called Pebbles, and I developed Fred the robot and Wilma the robot and Bam Bam the robot, which is a sumo. And I didn't want to call anything more, but one of the students at Ryerson was like, no, Pebbles stands for providing education by bringing learning environments to okay. Look. And then we developed this really cool telepresence robot, and it really helped the kids. The kids wanted to go back into class when they recovered. They did better in school than when we did all kinds of research. It made it into all sorts of magazines and everything. We even had Wayne Gretzky and the Hudson's Bay come in as sponsors. They had a line of Wayne Gretzky sports clothing, and $1 from every piece of clothing went to this project. And this Wayne's wife. I mean, it was an amazing project. And we actually then convinced the U.S. Congress to do the same thing. We developed a 2.0 version, and we deployed 100 systems across to every major pediatric hospital, because this is something every ill children should have. You should not be isolated at home. Isolation is a disease unto itself. But then I learned the second lesson of entrepreneurship is that if you have great technology and bad management, then and a lot of companies here, you'll learn that soon enough. You're not going to succeed. It's got 100% failure rate. If you have really bad technology and good management, then actually you got about a 50-50 chance of succeeding. What you really need is really good technology and really good management. And that's the problem with the technology field, is usually it's weighted way towards the technology and not the management. And so that was my second entrepreneurial lesson. And when I moved to Holland and Germany in around the 2000s and developed another telepresence robot named Moby, and Moby had a little brother named Moby Jr. Again, they're telepresence robots that you can control. And this was a piece that was shown at the Ontario Science Centre. And the idea was that Moby, the small robot had a inferiority complex because we were showed the event, and the large one had a screen, and it was very interactive. But the small one people treated it more as a toy. And so it kind of developed a personality disorder, but I'll let the video show you. That's his big brother, Senior. And I'm a second child, so I totally understand. And the thing was, actually with the small one, kids were very frightened of the large robot, actually, because it was much taller than them, and it was a bit, for adults it was nice because the screen was the same height. The kids, it was a bit intimidating. So the kids actually reacted to it in an incredible way. Actually, they just, because it was their height, it was round, it was soft, it talked, it interacted with them. It had a huge impact. Actually, this little girl really just wanted to take Moby home with her. I mean. So Moby found love in the end. That's good. And actually, just recently, I built an updated version of it called Franken Moby, which is Franken is Norwegian for girl, and it actually has its own house. They built its own house for it, where it goes and sleeps every night and eats energy to get recharged. And then they open the door and it comes out in the morning and greets the new visitors and introduces itself to the kids and is a guide robot, basically. It's still being controlled as a Telepresence robot, but it's the next generation. And it is a permanent exhibition. And as a media artist, I've been doing work, VR is a kind of a vast field. And I was in Berlin in 1988 making panoramic images of the Berlin Wall. And I got a chance to go back in 2010 and create a piece called Intersection. And it's an interactive mural of the Berlin Wall, where you can actually, when you come into the space, it looks like a life-sized image of the Berlin Wall. When you walk towards it, camera picks up your where you are, and it transforms that part of the image into 1988. And then if you walk closer, it transforms it into 2010. And actually, I've just received funding from the Ontario Arts Council and permission at a location just 20 meters from Checkpoint Charlie to put up a permanent installation like this on the street. So people walking by will walk by and they'll see what looks like a life-sized Berlin Wall. And if they go a bit closer, that area will morph into what it looked like in 1988. And if they go a little bit closer, into 2010. And so it's a living wall. And if anyone knows of a location like that, because this is just one part, I shot 4 images in '88, and I'm recreating them all. So you could have a 100-meter long mural like this at a place like an airport or a mall or something like this, because you can have multiple people. You can have 100 people interacting with this, all from different points along the stretch. And it was very successful. It was shown for Transmedial in Berlin in 1988, or no, sorry, 2010. And I spent a lot of time in Berlin, and I'll be reshooting this. And I found an old bridge image, which I thought was inaccessible because it was an active S-Bahn line, subway line. But now I found out that I was wrong, and I can actually go back and reshoot the image. It's a beautiful work, though, I think. And then I showed you, remember earlier, I showed you the arm wrestling robot and the Telepresence work we did in '86. Well, on McLuhan's 100th birthday, we got a chance to go back and do a 2.0 version of it. And we linked InterAccess here to V2 in Rotterdam, and it was very successful. Which is an avatar of physicalness of the person on the other side. And this is Laura, who's our guest. And Laura, do you want to drive the robot forward a bit?
Sure.
She's using her body on a step pad, you call it. So she's using body motion. So this is another an upgraded 2.0 version of the original robot you saw. So it's an actual metaphor for the physical body. Instead of simply having a video conference, which is a fixed hole in space, this is a metaphor for a video conference which is actually mobile. Just like you can move your body through space, this is real telepresence where you can actually physically go out and explore. Because that was the idea I had in the original piece, was that this idea of exploration is something that you scan around, you look around the room. And I really like this idea that I can't control what she's doing. I can go over and control the robot in her perspective, but if she wants to run into me or go somewhere else or not talk to me, that's up to her. So it's the idea of having control over a machine on one side of the Atlantic and yet no control on the machine on your side of the Atlantic. And that's the real beauty of the piece, I think, is this idea of exploration and the body as a physicalness that moves through space. And this is the other side of the robot where I'm now controlling the machine across the Atlantic in Toronto. And I'm using my body as almost a haptic interface. I'm using my body motions on this thing we call a step pad to control the robot's motion through space. And my face is appearing life-sized. I can talk to people over this headset. And then when I move my body forward, I can actually drive. And I can go up and run over people. Like this. And it's actually kind of fun because you have real control, and they have no control over me. I mean, I guess they can unplug me. Is the thing. And the problem we had with that piece was Norm White found that he still couldn't get the arm wrestling done because there was no real time. Everything's going through servers, and there's no actual physical telephone link anymore. That doesn't, an actual wire from here across the Atlantic doesn't exist anymore. It's all light, and it's all mediated and through servers and things. So there's always this time lag. And in Holland, I formed my third company. It's hopefully I've learned my entrepreneurial lessons at this point, and work with the Dutch telecom KPN, and we've helped thousands of kids connect using video conferencing as they're recovering from cancer at home back into their schools. And again, they do better socially, they do better academically, actually. There's just no downsides. The kids at school are like, oh, I wish I could be sick. And you're like, no, actually you don't wish you could be sick. But the kids treat the robot like a person. And it sits in their desk, and they can pan and tilt the camera. And we've gone through a whole series of, this was the first version where it was actually in a chair. We're now using the 2.0 version, which is more mobile because we found that the kids in high school needed to move from classroom to classroom. So you can just fold up the head and move it from classroom to classroom. And we have hundreds of these in operation in Holland right now. There was a 3.0 version that I designed and built, but it was not something that we went into production because it was still too bulky, I felt. And actually now you can see downstairs, as I'll show you in a second, a 4.0 version. But I've been working with Ryerson for many years. This is an NSERC-funded project called the emotive chair, which is designed to help people who can't hear, people who are deaf, feel music. Because people who are deaf think of music as bass, and they never get the nuances of music. The emotive chair project with Dr. Fells here at the Inclusive Design Center was an NSERC-funded project. I was the artist in residence. And actually the idea was that you would design the unit to have different frequencies for different parts of the body. And the human body would then put together a much more complex soundscape through the skin, through tactile sensation. And the TAD system, tactile audio devices, Maria is taking this on into the next stage, and I'll show you how that worked.
Well, the crunch of a loud guitar chord, the rhythm of the drum, the crescendo of an orchestra. Music is something that many of us take for granted, the magic of music. But that's magic that is often lost, usually lost, for people with hearing impairment. And that's where a unique new invention comes in. Deanna Sumanek tells us more about it this morning.
Many people who go to concerts hear this. But some of the people at this concert are hearing this. About half of the attendees of this event are deaf or hard of hearing. But while they might not have been able to hear the music, they were able to feel it, thanks to these shaking, vibrating chairs. They call them emotive chairs. They were invented by a team of scientists at Toronto's Ryerson University.
For years, deaf people have been able to experience music by feeling the rhythm through floorboards or strong speakers. But it's a different story when it comes to higher frequencies like these, or those made by human voice.
The emotive chair treats the skin as a hearing membrane.
There's a lot of similarities between what our skin feels and how it feels and how our ear works.
The chair translates the frequency of different musical notes into vibrations of different intensity. Depending on the instrument, the user of the chair feels these vibrations in different parts of their body. A kick drum shakes the chair. Bassline
other things I want to show you before that. But it was very successful. Again, this idea of a multimodal interface, of different ways of interacting with the human body. But you know, I'd like to announce a whole series of breakthroughs I think we've had here at the conference. One is the WebModi project, which is a combination of the emotive chair and the web chair for autistic children. A new kind of fourth generation web chair that's on display downstairs. The iMouse, but I'm not going to call it the iMouse because I'd get sued by Samsung, I think. But you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. The Nanocopter project, and the launch of the Cohesion Cafes initiative. WebModi is a combination of the emotive chair and the web chair. Autism, we believe, through the research we're doing, is a reversal in the maturation process. Children who are autistic, they develop cognitive thinking skills before emotional skills. So they become overwhelmed because they never do develop emotional sensitivity. So they become overwhelmed with sensory data. It's like being in a noisy bar and listening to your friend across the table while a band is playing and there's music and there's 100 other people. It's very difficult, but because most of us here, but there are probably some people dealing with the issue of autism here as well, they can't filter. They can't just filter out all that and focus. And what we believe with Dr. Delphos in Utrecht and Dr. Jason Nolan here at Ryerson, who actually is someone dealing with the issue of autism, we believe that we can help these children mature their sensorium by combining tactile and video conferencing to give them a chance to go into class when they want to, or to go into class from a safe room, or to be in class physically. And this is a research project funded by the Ontario Centres for Excellence. And it's a breakthrough. We've got 30 kids in Holland who are now using this. Jeroen, a kid who's never been to class, is now going to class. Not all the time. Sometimes he comes in on the web chair, but he's going to class sometimes. He went to school one time, and the new friend he made wanted to play video games with him at home. And he said, okay, but he's never had a friend come home in his life. The next day, this little kid was kind of pissed with him, and Jeroen didn't understand why. But what happened was he understood that you have to schedule play. We don't understand that, but Jeroen didn't understand that. So he said, oh, okay. So he scheduled some playtime with this little boy, and a week later his mom comes home. He's playing video games with his new friend, and he's never had a friend home in his life. And actually, he's now becoming social. He's learning how to socialize. Hamburg has just last week agreed to deploy 4 of these systems in Germany. We're working with Ryerson, we're working with TAD, my company, WebChair in Holland, and this is a breakthrough in autism research. This is something that will change so many lives. You know, it's integration, not isolation. That's the key to this kind of technology. We're trying to integrate people, we're not trying to isolate them.
Most children go to school. Some children, however, can't attend school because of illness, autism, mental or behavioral problems. WebChair brings those children back to school and helps them reintegrate into our society. In Europe, 250,000 children stay at home, isolated from their teachers and classmates. With the WebChair, an easy-to-use, high-quality video conference system, students can access classes from a safe environment at their own pace. WebChair students gradually follow more lessons and feel connected to their classmates. WebChair has already helped 900 children to successfully go back to class, boosting their cognitive skills and self-confidence, allowing them to physically attend school at some later time. Please contact us to see if WebChair might be a good solution for your child or student.
And this is the new WebChair 4.0. It actually rotates again like the Pebbles systems, using a tablet-based computer, so it's very lightweight. a 4K camera, which gives a 5x zoom. And again, the rotating head gives gaze awareness, so you can kind of tell where the person's looking. And we have it on display. You can test it out downstairs. The iMouse, the problem with video conferencing is you're kind of controlling a camera remotely, but you never know where it is. So this is, again, we're not going to call it the iMouse. But this is the idea, is that when I control this eye, that I go like this, the camera on the other side of the world mimics that motion. So I can tell exactly if I look up, if I look down, and I can see on screen what's happening. But it's a beautiful way for the user to understand. It's a tangible user interface. Using a slider for zoom control. And this is a new project I'm just initiating now. I've received Canada Council funding to develop the nanocopter, which again is an old piece that I did. This was an image from 1988 when I was working in my first company, Horizon Scan, and what that is an actual small ball bearing that's been mirror coated, and a microscope is looking down on it, creating this image, which is a very tiny fisheye lens, which gives you a panorama. And actually, with this website there, thanks to meta texture, you can actually use your phone here at the conference and actually view that image as a panorama. And the idea is that I'm going to create a microscopic helicopter. And basically, by having a microscope looking down on a new lens that I'm going to create, and having you in a swivel chair with a head mount on and a joystick, you can actually control the slide tray. So it'll appear as if you're flying through this miniature world with the ants and with the other creatures, as a way to extend your scope of what we think of as real. So when you put it on the head mount, you're not isolated in a non-real environment. You will actually be in a real environment. And I'm really looking forward to later this year, and maybe next year I'll be able to have a nanocopter downstairs and show you. And this is I'm gonna end with this because this is really my piece de resistance. I've been working on this for 35 years. This idea of being able to link people physically from one space to another. I've always been after this idea of being able to connect people. These are what we call web booths. They were shown at the expo in 2010. Okay, let me just finish with this video, and then it's only a few minutes long. And this will, I think, just explain the whole concept. So the idea is you have two cafes, let's say one in Montreal, one in Toronto, and they're exactly the same. And they're filled with all kinds of telepresence furniture. And this furniture actually allows you to interact in a very natural way with people from the other side of the country. You can play pool together. We have this set up as an exhibition in Studio B downstairs as the presence fields. You can, in the cafes, you'll be able to link in with web booths, with bars, with stages, and actually interact with people from a distance as if you were actually in the same space with them. There's no interface. The best user interface is no interface. Keep it simple, stupid, as Bill Buxton likes to point out. You can drive a robot around. You can play pool with someone. You can play darts. It's a game space. It's instead of the social network being something that you're isolated at home. You know, you go to a bar not to drink a $7 beer because you can have a $1 beer at home. You go to be with your friends. You go to socially engage. And that's what the cohesion cafes will be. They will be places where you can actually go to communicate and be with your friends and interact from a distance. And this to me is the future. You know, virtual reality with headsets is great, but it's like being in a movie theater, and you don't live in a movie theater except maybe during the festival of festivals. But and so the Cohesion Cafes is, for me, it's the idea of connection, and that's my idea of integration, not isolation, because as we use computer technology more and more, we become more isolated. And I think it's through our friendships and our physical social networks that keep us in touch with our reality. So thank you very much.